The whiskey-soaked laughter from the saloon carried across Main Street on that bitter November night in 1883. And Fiona Turner knew, without looking, that they were placing bets on her spinsterhood again. She pulled her worn shawl tighter against the freezing wind that swept down from the mountains surrounding Willits, California, and kept her head high as she walked past the Golden Pine Saloon with a basket of mended shirts clutched against her chest. At 23 years old, she had become the town's favorite source of entertainment, the sharp-tongued seamstress who could outshoot half the men at the county fair, and had turned down more marriage proposals than any woman had a right to refuse. The betting had started last spring when Johnny Patterson had proposed for the third time, and she had told him she would rather marry a rattlesnake. By summer, every unattached man in town had taken their turn, and by autumn, the bets had evolved into something crueler. No cowboy would marry her by spring, they said. She was too headstrong, too independent, too quick with her rifle and her tongue. The pot had grown to nearly $300, money that could buy a decent horse or 6 months of provisions. Money that represented her worth in their eyes, or rather, her lack of it. Fiona pushed open the door to the boarding house where she rented a small room on the second floor. Mrs. Keller looked up from her knitting by the fire, her weathered face creasing with sympathy that Fiona neither wanted nor needed. "They are at it again," Mrs. Keller said softly. "It was not a question." "Let them waste their money," Fiona replied, climbing the stairs to her room. She set down the basket and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-dusted street below. Willits was a timber town, built on the backs of men who felled giant redwoods and drove them down to the mills. It was rough and raw, a place where women were expected to be soft and compliant, to balance out the harshness of the landscape and the work. Fiona had never been good at being what was expected. Her father had been a gunsmith, one of the best in Northern California, and he had taught her everything he knew before the fever took him 5 years ago. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, so it had always been just the two of them in the little shop on the edge of town. He had raised her to think for herself, to shoot straight, to never settle for less than she deserved. Those lessons had made her an outcast in a town that valued conformity above all else. She moved away from the window and began to prepare for bed, but sleep was slow in coming. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the first real storm of winter, and somewhere in the darkness she could hear the sound of horses approaching town. The sound grew louder, more urgent, and then there were shouts from the street below. Fiona rose and looked out to see a group of riders pulling up in front of the doctor's house. Even from this distance, she could see that one of them was slumped in his saddle, barely conscious. The town doctor, old Samuel Morton, emerged from his house in his nightshirt, and there was a flurry of activity as they carried the injured man inside. She watched for a while longer, but the street grew quiet again, and eventually she returned to bed. It was none of her concern. Men were always getting themselves hurt in the lumber camps or in fights outside the saloons. This was nothing new. Morning came cold and sharp, with 3 inches of snow on the ground and more falling from a steel-gray sky. Fiona wrapped herself in her warmest clothes and made her way to the general store where she did most of her sewing work. Mr. Chen, who ran the store with his wife, had a steady stream of customers who needed mending, alterations, or new clothes made from scratch. It was honest work that kept her fed and housed, even if it did not inspire much passion. The store was already busy when she arrived, with half a dozen women clustered near the counter, their voices low and excited. Fiona recognized the signs of fresh gossip immediately. "Did you hear about the cowboy they brought in last night?" Martha Henderson was saying, her eyes bright with the thrill of knowing something others did not. "He is staying at Doc Morton's place, barely survived a fall in the high country. They say he was tracking rustlers up near the ridgeline when his horse spooked and went over an embankment." "Is he going to live?" someone asked. "Doc says he will, but he is in bad shape. Broken ribs, busted shoulder, all manner of cuts and bruises. He will be laid up for weeks at least." Fiona moved past them to the back room where she kept her sewing supplies, but she could still hear their voices carrying through the store. "What was he doing up in the high country anyway?" another voice asked. "Working for the Cattlemen's Association, I heard. They have been losing stock to rustlers all season. This one was supposed to be good, real good. Came all the way from Wyoming with a reputation for tracking." The conversation shifted to other topics, and Fiona settled into her work. She had 4 shirts to mend, a dress to alter, and a new coat to finish for the banker's wife. The hours passed in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread, the quiet satisfaction of work done well. It was nearly noon when the door to the store opened and Doc Morton came in, stamping snow from his boots. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and when Mr. Chen asked him about his patient, he just shook his head. "He will live, but it was a near thing. Another few hours in that cold and he would have frozen to death. As it is, he has got a long recovery ahead of him." The doctor paused, then added, "I am going to need help, actually. My wife is visiting her sister in Sacramento, and I cannot leave him alone for long periods. He needs someone to change his bandages, make sure he eats, keep an eye on him. I would pay fair wages." Several of the women exchanged glances, but no one volunteered. Nursing was hard, often unpleasant work, and a strange man at that. Fiona found herself speaking before she had really thought it through. "I can help," she said, looking up from her sewing. "I have done nursing before." That was not entirely true. She had cared for her father during his final illness, but that was family, not a stranger. Still, the words were out and Doc Morton's face flooded with relief. "Miss Turner, that would be a blessing. Can you start this afternoon? I will pay you 50 cents a day and meals included." 50 cents a day was good money, better than she made from sewing. Fiona nodded, already calculating how much extra she could save. "I will be there at 2 o'clock. The doctor left, and the other women stared at her with a mixture of surprise and something else, something that might have been respect or might have been disapproval. It was hard to tell in Willits. She finished the shirt she was working on and packed up her supplies, then made her way back to the boarding house to collect a few things. Mrs. Keller raised an eyebrow when Fiona told her about the arrangement, but said nothing. The old woman had learned long ago that Fiona Turner made her own decisions and rarely listened to advice. At 2 o'clock precisely, Fiona knocked on the door of Doc Morton's house. He let her in quickly, grateful to have the help, and led her upstairs to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The man in the bed was young, perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and a face that would have been handsome if it were not so bruised and swollen. His left arm was strapped across his chest, and she could see the bulky wrapping of bandages around his ribs beneath the nightshirt. His breathing was shallow and pained, but steady. "This is Adam Irwin," Doc Morton said quietly. "Adam, this is Miss Fiona Turner. She's going to be helping me take care of you for the next few weeks." The man's eyes opened, and Fiona found herself looking into the clearest gray eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of winter sky, sharp and intelligent despite the obvious pain he was in. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing far more than she wanted to reveal. "Madam," he said, his voice rough and low. Just that one word, but there was a courtesy in it that surprised her. "Mr. Irwin," she replied, keeping her tone professional. The doctor tells me you took quite a fall. Horse went over a cliff, I went with it. Horse did not make it. His jaw tightened and she could see the grief there. A cowboy's horse was often his most trusted companion, sometimes his only friend. I am sorry, she said, and meant it. Doc Morton showed her what needed to be done, how to change the bandages, what to watch for in terms of fever or infection, how to help Adam sit up to eat without putting too much strain on his ribs. It was all straightforward enough, and by the time the doctor left to make his evening rounds, Fiona felt confident she could handle it. She spent the afternoon in a chair by the window, mending one of the shirts she had brought with her while Adam slept. The room was quiet except for the occasional pop and crackle from the fire in the small stove and the whisper of falling snow against the window. It was almost peaceful. When Adam woke near sunset, she brought him water and helped him drink, then prepared the simple meal Doc Morton had left instructions for. Getting him into a sitting position was awkward and clearly painful, but Adam gritted his teeth and did not complain. She respected that. "You are from Willits?" he asked between careful spoonfuls of broth. "Born and raised," she said. "My father was the gunsmith here. He died 5 years ago, fever." Adam nodded slowly. "I am sorry, that must have been hard." It was. She did not elaborate and he did not press. They ate in silence for a while and then he asked, "You know how to use those guns he made?" Fiona smiled slightly. "I know how to use them. I heard some of the men talking before I left on that tracking job. Said there was a woman in town who could outshoot most of the men at the fair last summer. That you? That was me." She did not say it boastfully, just stated it as fact. "What did you win?" $1 and a lot of resentment. That surprised a laugh out of him, though it turned into a grimace of pain halfway through. "I bet not many men like being shown up." "No," Fiona agreed. "They do not." They talked a bit more careful small talk about the weather and the town, nothing too deep or personal. When he started to tire, she helped him lie back down and adjusted the blankets around him. His eyes were already closing, exhaustion claiming him quickly. Fiona settled back into her chair and picked up her mending again. Through the window, she could see lights beginning to appear in the houses along the street, warm golden squares in the growing darkness. Snow continued to fall, thick and steady, blanketing the town in white. It was going to be a hard winter. She could feel it in her bones. The days fell into a pattern after that. Fiona would arrive at Doc Morton's house in the morning, and the doctor would leave to make his rounds or see patients at his office. She would change Adam's bandages, help him eat, make sure he took the medicine Doc Morton left for him. In between, she sewed and they talked. Adam Irwin was not like the men she had known in Willits. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and did not try to tell her what she should think or feel or do. He had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had left home at 19 to make his own way. He had worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, had spent 2 years as a deputy in a rough mining town in Nevada, and had most recently been tracking for the Cattlemen's Association. Why tracking? Fiona asked one afternoon about a week into his recovery. He was healing well, the swelling in his face gone down, the worst of the bruising starting to fade to yellow and green. Adam was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the snow-covered street. "I like the solitude, I suppose. Just me and the trail and figuring out where the other fellow went. It is like solving a puzzle, but one that matters. When I catch a rustler, I am helping ranchers keep their livelihoods. When I track down a lost child or a missing person, I am bringing families back together." He glanced at her. "It feels like work that means something." Fiona understood that. Her father had felt the same way about gunsmithing, the careful precision of creating something both beautiful and functional, something that could protect a person or put food on their table. She felt a pang of loss, sharp and unexpected. "You miss him," Adam said softly. It was not a question. "Every day." She set down her sewing and looked at him directly. "He was the only person who ever saw me for who I really am, not who they think I should be." "Who do they think you should be?" "Quiet, obedient, willing to marry the first man who asks and spend the rest of my life cooking and cleaning and producing children." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Adam's gray eyes were steady on her face. "And who are you really?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Fiona found herself answering honestly, something she rarely did. "I am someone who wants more. I want to make my own choices, live my own life. I want to be valued for my skills and my mind, not just my ability to keep house." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "In Willits, that makes me unmarriageable. There is actually a bet going around town about it. $300 says no cowboy will marry me by spring." Adam's expression darkened. "That is cruel. That is Willits." She picked up her sewing again, needing something to do with her hands. "I should not have told you that. It does not matter." "It matters," Adam said quietly. "You matter." The simple sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. She focused on her stitching and said nothing more, but something had shifted between them in that moment, something she could not quite name. As the days passed and December deepened, Adam grew stronger. He could sit up on his own now, could move around the room with careful steps, though his ribs still ached and his shoulder was far from healed. Doc Morton was pleased with his progress and said that by Christmas he should be well enough to travel if he wanted to move on. The thought of Adam leaving filled Fiona with an unexpected sadness. She had grown accustomed to their conversations, to the way he looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, not just an oddity to be gossiped about. She had grown accustomed to his presence, the quiet strength of him, the dry humor that surfaced when he was feeling better. She tried to tell herself it was just because he was her patient, that it would be the same with anyone she had spent so much time with. But she knew she was lying to herself. It was mid-December when everything changed. Fiona arrived one morning to find Adam already awake and dressed, standing by the window with his good arm braced against the frame. The sky outside was gray and heavy with the promise of more snow. "You should not be up yet," she said, setting down her basket. "Doc Morton said another week of rest at least." "I am fine," Adam said, but his voice was strained. When he turned to look at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I heard them last night." "Heard who?" "The men from the saloon. They were walking past, talking about the bet." His jaw was tight with anger. "They were talking about you like you were livestock, speculating about whether any of them could win that money by forcing you to the altar," one of them said. He stopped, shook his head. It does not matter what he said. It was vile. Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of shame and fury. "I told you, that is just how they are here." "It is not right," Adam said fiercely. "You deserve better than this town, better than men who would treat you like a prize to be won." "What I deserve and what I have are two different things," Fiona said quietly. She moved to the chair and sat down, suddenly tired. "This is my home, Adam. For better or worse, this is where I belong. Do you, though?" He crossed the room carefully, lowering himself into the other chair with a barely suppressed wince. "You said yourself you want more. Maybe it is time to take it." "And go where? Do what?" "I am a seamstress and a decent shot. Those are not skills that open many doors for a woman traveling alone." Adam was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Marry me." Fiona stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me," he repeated. "Not for the bet, not for their entertainment." Marry me because I am offering you a way out of this town, a chance at something different. Marry me because in the past 2 weeks, you have become the most interesting, most genuine person I have ever met, and the thought of leaving here without you feels wrong." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Adam, you barely know me. I barely know you. We cannot just—" "Why not?" He leaned forward, his gray eyes locked on hers. "We know enough. I know you are brave and smart and kind. I know you do not back down from what scares you. I know you see the world the way it is, not the way you wish it was. That is more than most people know before they marry." "But you do not love me," Fiona said, and the words hurt to speak. "This would be a practical arrangement, nothing more." "No," Adam agreed. "I do not love you, not yet." "But I could, Fiona. I think I already am starting to, and I think maybe you feel the same way." She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but the words would not come, because he was right. Over the past 2 weeks, she had found herself thinking about him constantly, looking forward to their conversations, feeling lighter in his presence. She had told herself it was just the novelty of having someone treat her with respect, but it was more than that. It was the way he listened, really listened. It was the quiet strength of him, the way he did not try to diminish her to make himself feel bigger. It was 100 small things that added up to something that might, given time, become love. "Even if I said yes," she said slowly, "they would never believe it was real. They would say you only married me to win the bet, that I must have paid you or tricked you somehow. It would make everything worse." Adam's smile was sharp and cold. "Let them try. I do not care what they think, and neither should you. Besides," he added, his expression softening, "there is no way I could win the bet anyway. The terms are that no cowboy will marry you by spring. Spring starts in March. Today is December 14th. If we married tonight, it would be winter. They cannot claim the bet is won or lost until spring arrives." Fiona's mind was racing. It was madness. It was impossible. It was everything she had told herself she did not want, an impulsive decision that could shape the rest of her life. And yet, where would we go? She heard herself ask. "Wyoming," Adam said immediately. "My brother owns a ranch near Sheridan. He has been after me for years to come home, settle down. He would welcome us both, I know he would. You could have space, freedom. You could keep your independence, Fiona. I would never try to take that from you." "You are asking me to leave everything I know, everyone I know, for a man I have known for 2 weeks." "Yes," Adam said simply. "I am asking you to take a chance. Not on me, not really, on yourself. On the possibility that there is something better out there than a town that bets on your loneliness." She stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Somewhere in the Golden Pine Saloon, men were drinking and laughing and probably adding to the pot, never thinking about her as a real person with real feelings. To them, she was just a joke, a stubborn woman who needed to be put in her place. Adam was offering her an escape. He was offering her respect, partnership, the chance to be seen as an equal. He was offering the possibility of love, real love, not the conditional kind that came with demands and restrictions. It was terrifying. It was reckless. It was the most sensible thing she could imagine doing. "Tonight?" she asked without turning around. "Tonight," Adam confirmed. "Before I lose my nerve, before you lose yours." Fiona closed her eyes and thought about her father, about what he would want for her. He would want her to be happy, she knew that. He would want her to be brave. He would want her to live a life that was wholly her own, chosen and claimed with both hands. She turned to face Adam, her decision made. "All right, yes, I will marry you." His face transformed, the hardness falling away to reveal something vulnerable and hopeful. "Truly, truly. But we do it properly. I will not have anyone saying this was done in secret or shamefully. We find Reverend Walsh, we stand in front of witnesses, we do this right." Adam stood, moving to her side. He took her hand in his good one, his touch warm and steady. "However you want it done. I just want you to be sure." "I am not sure," Fiona admitted. "I am terrified, but I am also more certain of this than I have been of anything in a long time." They stood there together by the window, hands linked, watching the snow fall over Willits. Then Adam squeezed her hand gently and released it. "We should tell Doc Morton first. He deserves to know." The doctor was surprised but not disapproving when they told him. He looked from Adam to Fiona and back again, his weathered face thoughtful. "You are both adults," he said finally. "And I have seen the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching. If this is what you want, I will not stand in your way. But Adam, are you well enough for this? You are still healing." "I am well enough to stand in front of a preacher and say some vows," Adam said. "The rest can wait." Doc Morton nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing. Let me know if you need anything." They left the house together, Fiona bundled in her warmest cloak, Adam moving carefully but determinedly at her side. The Reverend lived in a small house near the church, and when they knocked on his door and explained what they wanted, his eyes widened in surprise. "Tonight, in this weather?" "Tonight," Fiona confirmed. "We would like to be married at the church with witnesses present. Is that possible?" Reverend Walsh was an old man, but he had a kind face and a reputation for fairness. He studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "If you are certain this is what you want, I will perform the ceremony. Give me an hour to prepare the church and gather some witnesses." They agreed and walked back toward the center of town. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that clung to their clothes and hair. Despite the cold, despite the strangeness of it all, Fiona felt a sense of lightness she had not experienced in years. "Do you want to get your things from the boarding house?" Adam asked. "We can leave tomorrow if the weather clears. The sooner we are out of this town, the better." Fiona nodded. "I do not have much. Most of what I own fits in a single trunk." They went to the boarding house together, and Mrs. Keller took one look at them and seemed to understand without being told. "You are leaving. Getting married," Fiona corrected. "Tonight. We will be gone in the morning." Mrs. Keller's eyes misted over. She had always been kind to Fiona, had never joined in the gossip or the cruelty. "I am happy for you, dear, truly happy. You deserve some joy." "Thank you," Fiona said, surprised by the emotion in her own voice. She went upstairs and began packing her trunk, folding her few dresses, her sewing supplies, the leather-bound journal her father had given her, the worn Bible that had been her mother's. Everything that mattered fit into one small space. It was a sobering realization. Adam helped her carry the trunk downstairs despite her protests, refusing to let her manage it alone even though she could see the strain it put on his injured shoulder. They left it by the door to be collected in the morning, and then they walked together through the falling snow toward the church. Word had spread fast, as it always did in small towns. When they arrived, there were already people gathering despite the cold and the late hour. Doc Morton was there, and Mrs. Keller, and Mr. and Mrs. Chen from the general store. But there were others too, people from the saloon, men who had been placing bets, women who had gossiped. They had come to witness the spectacle, to see if it was really true. Fiona felt Adam tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand. "Let them watch," she whispered. "Let them see." The church was cold, the stove not yet warmed enough to fight off the December chill. Reverend Walsh stood at the altar in his vestments, his Bible open before him. Adam and Fiona walked down the aisle together, no one to give her away because she was giving herself, making her own choice. They stood before the Reverend, and he began the ceremony. His voice was steady and sure, speaking the ancient words about love and commitment, about cleaving to one another, forsaking all others. When it came time for the vows, Adam turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious and intent. "I, Adam Irwin, take you, Fiona Turner, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, to respect you, to stand beside you as a partner and equal. I promise to see you as you truly are and to value what I see. I promise to build a life with you that honors both of us and to never try to make you less than you are." His words were not the traditional ones, but they were perfect, exactly what Fiona needed to hear. When it was her turn, she spoke from her heart. "I, Fiona Turner, take you, Adam Irwin, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand with you, to support you, to face whatever comes with courage and honesty. I promise to see you clearly, the good and the difficult, and to choose you anyway. I promise to build a life with you based on trust and respect, and to never stop growing into the person I am meant to be." Reverend Walsh smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "By the power vested in me by the state of California and the grace of God, I pronounce you husband and wife. Adam, you may kiss your bride." Adam stepped closer, his good hand coming up to cup her cheek. His touch was gentle, reverent, and when his lips met hers, the kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. It was not a kiss of passion, not yet, but it was real. It meant something. When they pulled apart, the church was silent except for the howling wind outside. Then Mrs. Keller started to clap, and Mr. Chen joined her, and soon the whole church was applauding. Not everyone looked happy about it. Some of the men from the saloon looked angry, cheated somehow, but Fiona did not care. She was married. She was free. She was beginning something new. They signed the papers that made it legal. Adam's handwriting bold and clear despite his injured shoulder, Fiona's smaller but equally steady. Doc Morton and Mrs. Keller signed as witnesses, and it was done. Fiona was no longer Fiona Turner. She was Fiona Irwin, wife of Adam Irwin, and tomorrow she would leave Willits behind forever. The small group walked back out into the snow, which had intensified into a full blizzard. The wind tore at their clothes, and visibility was down to just a few feet. Doc Morton insisted they come back to his house rather than try to find lodging elsewhere, and no one argued. The streets were already treacherous, drifts forming against buildings and fences. Inside the warm house, Mrs. Keller and Mrs. Chen had somehow managed to put together a small wedding supper, simple fare but made with care. They ate together in Doc Morton's dining room, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Fiona felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was part of something good. As the evening wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, the guests gradually departed, bundled in their heaviest coats and scarves. Finally, only Fiona and Adam remained with Doc Morton. "You two take the upstairs room," the doctor said. "I will sleep down here by the stove. You are married now. You should have privacy." Fiona felt her cheeks heat, suddenly aware of what the night would bring. She and Adam had not discussed it, had not talked about expectations or what their marriage would look like in its most intimate moments. She knew he was still healing, still in pain from his injuries. Surely he would not expect. Adam seemed to sense her thoughts. As they climbed the stairs together, he said quietly, "Nothing has to happen tonight, Fiona. We have time." She looked at him in the dim light of the hallway, this man who was now her husband, and felt a rush of gratitude and affection. "Thank you," she whispered. The bedroom was cold, the fire in the small stove having burned down to embers. Adam coaxed it back to life while Fiona changed into her nightgown behind a screen in the corner. When she emerged, he was already in bed, propped up against the pillows with his arm still strapped across his chest. She climbed in beside him, and they lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind howl and the snow patter against the window. After a moment, Adam reached out with his good hand and found hers under the blankets. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am not sure," Fiona admitted. "I feel like I should be terrified. I just married a man I barely know, and tomorrow I am leaving the only home I have ever known. But instead I feel—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Hopeful. Is that strange?" "No," Adam said. "I feel it too. Like something is beginning, something that could be really good if we are brave enough to let it." They talked quietly in the darkness, sharing more pieces of themselves. Adam told her about his childhood on the ranch in Wyoming, about his 3 older brothers who had teased him mercilessly and also protected him fiercely. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was 15, and his father, stern but fair, who had taught him the value of honest work. Fiona told him about growing up in her father's shop, about learning to clean and repair guns before she learned to read, about the way her father had encouraged her curiosity instead of trying to suppress it. She told him about the loneliness after her father died, the gradual realization that she did not fit in this town and never would. "I used to think there was something wrong with me," she confessed, "because I wanted more than what everyone said I should want. I thought maybe I was broken somehow." Adam's hand tightened on hers. "You are not broken. This town is too small for you, that is all. Wyoming is different. There is space there, room to breathe, you will see." Eventually, exhaustion caught up with them both. Fiona fell asleep with Adam's hand still holding hers, and for the first time in years, she did not dream of her father or the gun shop or the narrow streets of Willits. She dreamed of wide, open spaces and endless sky, of a future that was hers to shape. Morning came gray and cold, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the early hours. The snow had drifted high against the buildings, and the streets were nearly impassable. Doc Morton looked out at it and shook his head. "You will not be leaving today," he said. "Probably not tomorrow either. The roads will be blocked for days." Fiona felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. She wanted to start their new life, but she also was not quite ready to say goodbye to everything familiar. Adam took it in stride, already planning their route once they could travel. They spent the next 3 days snowed in with Doc Morton, helping around the house and preparing for their journey. Adam's strength was returning daily, and though he was still careful with his shoulder, he could do more each day. They talked constantly, sharing stories and opinions, debating everything from politics to religion to the best way to train a horse. They discovered they disagreed about many things, but they also discovered that disagreeing did not have to mean fighting. They could see things differently and still respect each other. On the 4th day after the wedding, the sky finally cleared, revealing a world transformed by snow. The entire town was buried under 2 feet of white, and the temperature had dropped to well below freezing. But the road crews were out, and by afternoon, the main road heading north was passable for wagons and horses. Adam spent the morning at the livery, negotiating for a wagon and team. When he returned, he had not only secured transportation, but also found a solid brown gelding that he said would do for saddle work once they reached Wyoming. "The liveryman heard we were married," Adam told her with a wry smile. "He gave me a good price. I think he was just happy to see you leaving town." "Probably," Fiona agreed without rancor. She had said her goodbyes to Mrs. Keller and Mr. and Mrs. Chen, the few people in town who had shown her genuine kindness. She had not bothered with anyone else. They loaded her trunk into the wagon along with supplies for the journey and the few things Adam had brought with him to Willits. Doc Morton came out to see them off, pressing a package of food and medical supplies into Fiona's hands. "Just in case," he said. And right when you get settled. I want to know you both made it safe." "We will," Fiona promised, surprised to find tears stinging her eyes. The old doctor had been kind to her over the years, one of the few men in town who had treated her with consistent respect. Adam climbed up onto the wagon seat, moving more easily now, and offered Fiona his hand. She took it and settled beside him, wrapping herself in blankets against the bitter cold. He released the brake and clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. They made their way slowly up Main Street, the wheels crunching through the packed snow. A few people came out to watch them go, but no one called out or waved. Fiona kept her eyes forward, looking toward the mountains that rose to the north, toward the future that waited beyond them. Just as they reached the edge of town, there was a shout behind them. Fiona turned to see several men spilling out of the saloon, led by Johnny Patterson, the man who had proposed to her 3 times. "Wait," he called, jogging through the snow toward them. Adam pulled the horses to a halt, his jaw tight. Johnny reached the wagon, breathing hard. Up close, Fiona could see he was slightly drunk, even though it was barely past noon. "You cannot leave," he said, looking up at her. "The bet. Someone has to win the bet." "No one wins," Fiona said coldly. "I married in December, not spring. The terms of your cruel little wager are not met." "But you married a cowboy," Johnny protested. "That means we all lose." "Good," Fiona said. "Maybe losing that money will teach you all something about treating people with decency." "You did this on purpose," another man accused, coming up behind Johnny. "You married him just to spite us." Adam's voice was quiet but carried clearly in the cold air. "She married me because I asked her, and because she wanted a life with someone who sees her worth. None of you ever did. You made a game of her, and now you are angry because she refused to play. That is your problem, not ours." He clicked to the horses again, and the wagon rolled forward. The men stood in the street behind them, angry and impotent, and Fiona felt a fierce satisfaction. She had won, not by their rules but by her own. She had chosen her path, and it led away from Willits forever. The journey to Wyoming took nearly 2 months. They traveled slowly, partly because of the weather and partly because Adam was still healing. They moved through Northern California and into Oregon, following wagon roads when they could and forging their own path when they could not. The winter was harsh, with frequent storms that forced them to shelter for days at a time in small towns or isolated way stations. But the hardship of the journey only brought them closer. They learned to work together, to anticipate each other's needs, to support each other through cold and exhaustion. They talked during the long hours on the wagon seat, sharing their hopes and fears and dreams. And slowly, carefully, they began to learn each other in other ways. It started with small touches, hands clasping for warmth. Adam's arm around Fiona's shoulders as they sat by campfires. Then more, tentative kisses in the darkness of rented rooms, gentle explorations that respected Adam's healing body and Fiona's inexperience. By the time they crossed into Wyoming territory in late January, they had become truly married in every sense of the word. Fiona had fallen in love with her husband. She was not sure exactly when it happened, could not point to a single moment. Maybe it was the morning she woke to find him brewing coffee over the fire, his breath steaming in the frozen air as he hummed tunelessly to himself. Maybe it was the night they had been caught in a storm, and he had given her the only dry blanket, refusing to take it back even when his lips turned blue from cold. Maybe it was the 100 small kindnesses, the way he listened, the way he made her laugh, the way he looked at her like she was the most remarkable thing he had ever seen. Whatever the reason, she loved him. And she could see in his eyes, in his touch, in the way he said her name, that he loved her too. They reached the Irwin ranch on a clear February morning, the sun brilliant on the snow-covered plains. The ranch house was larger than Fiona had expected, a sprawling structure of wood and stone with smoke curling from two chimneys. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, and she could see cattle in the distance, dark shapes against the white. As the wagon pulled into the yard, the front door opened, and a man emerged, followed quickly by two others. Adam's brothers, Fiona realized, seeing the family resemblance in their builds and bearing. The oldest came forward first, a big man with the same gray eyes as Adam but with more lines around them, more weight of responsibility. "Adam," he said, and there was relief and joy in his voice. "We got your telegram from Oregon, been watching for you." Adam climbed down from the wagon, and the two men embraced, thumping each other on the back in the way men did when emotions ran too deep for words. Then, Adam turned and offered his hand to Fiona. "Andrew, these are my brothers. Andrew, Marcus, and Thomas. Boys, this is my wife, Fiona." The three men stared at her, clearly surprised. Then Andrew stepped forward, pulling off his hat. "Madam, it is a pleasure to meet you. We had no idea Adam was even courting anyone." "It was a short courtship," Fiona said with a slight smile, "but we are very sure of each other." The other brothers came forward to introduce themselves, all of them friendly and welcoming despite their obvious surprise. They helped unload the wagon and ushered Fiona and Adam into the warm house, where Andrew's wife Sarah was already preparing food and fussing over them both. Over dinner, they told the story of how they had met, how they had married on that frozen December night. Andrew shook his head in wonder. "You always did do things your own way," he said to Adam. "But I have to say, this is the most impulsive thing you have ever done." "Best decision I ever made," Adam replied, reaching over to take Fiona's hand. The simple gesture, the warmth in his voice, made Fiona's heart swell. They settled into life on the ranch with surprising ease. Andrew was happy to have Adam back, to have another hand to help with the work. The ranch was prosperous, with good grazing land and a solid reputation for quality cattle. There was plenty of room for Adam and Fiona to build their own life while still being part of the larger family. Fiona discovered that she loved ranch life. She loved the wide, open spaces, the way the sky seemed to go on forever. She loved learning to ride properly, spending hours in the saddle with Adam as he showed her the boundaries of their land. She loved the work of it, the tangible results of effort and care. And she loved being part of a family again. Sarah became a true friend, the first woman friend Fiona had ever really had. Adam's brothers treated her with respect and easy affection, accepting her into their circle without question. When she mentioned she had been a seamstress, they brought her mending and alteration work, and word spread to neighboring ranches. Soon she had more work than she could handle, her skills in demand. But more than anything, she loved building a life with Adam. They claimed a piece of land on the eastern edge of the ranch and began planning a house of their own. It would be small at first, just a few rooms, but it would be theirs. They would build it together, literally and figuratively. Spring came to Wyoming in a rush of melting snow and emerging green. By the time the wildflowers started to bloom in late April, Fiona was certain of what she had begun to suspect in March. She was carrying Adam's child. She told him one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the mountains to the west. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he turned to her with wonder written all over his face. "Truly?" he asked. "Truly," she confirmed. "By November, maybe early December." Adam pulled her into his arms, holding her gently but firmly, and she could feel him trembling. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I love you so much, Fiona. I know I do not say it enough, but I do." "I love you too," she whispered back. "More than I ever thought possible." They told the family that night, and there was rejoicing. Sarah cried happy tears and immediately began planning, talking about baby clothes and cribs and all the things they would need. Andrew clapped Adam on the back and made jokes about sleepless nights. The younger brothers, Marcus and Thomas, just grinned and said they were looking forward to being uncles. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Adam threw himself into finishing their house, determined to have it ready before the baby came. Fiona sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands working the familiar patterns but with a new sense of purpose. She was creating not for strangers or for money, but for her child, hers and Adam's. In July, a letter arrived from California. It was from Doc Morton, responding to the letter Fiona had sent months earlier. He was glad to hear they had arrived safely, glad to know they were happy and settled. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned that the betting pool had finally been dissolved, the money donated to the church fund for widows and orphans. Johnny Patterson had left town in the spring, heading to the gold fields in Colorado. Most of the other men who had been part of the betting had moved on as well, or had the grace to be ashamed of themselves. Fiona read the letter to Adam that evening, and when she finished, they looked at each other and laughed. It all seemed so distant now, so petty and small. That life, that version of herself, felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. "You ever miss it?" Adam asked. "California, I mean, the mountains and the redwoods." "Sometimes," Fiona admitted, "but I do not miss the person I was there. I like who I am here better." "Who are you here?" he asked, though she knew he already knew the answer. "Free," she said simply. "I am free here in a way I never was there. Free to be myself, to make my own choices, to love and be loved without conditions." She placed his hand on her rounded belly where their child moved and grew. "I am building something here that is wholly mine, wholly ours. I would not trade that for anything." Their son was born on a cold November night, almost exactly 1 year after that fateful evening when Fiona had heard the bets being placed in the saloon. The birth was hard, as first births often were, but Fiona was strong and Sarah was experienced. And by morning they had a healthy baby boy with a powerful set of lungs and his father's gray eyes. They named him Samuel, after Doc Morton, and William for Adam's father, who had passed away before Adam had left for California. Samuel William Irwin, their firstborn son, the first fruit of their unlikely marriage. Adam held his son with a kind of reverent wonder, his large hands so careful with the tiny bundle. "He is perfect," he kept saying. "Fiona, he is perfect." She watched her husband and their child and felt a completeness she had never known was possible. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, this sense of belonging, of purpose, of love that demanded nothing and gave everything. The years that followed were full and rich. They finished their house and made it a home, filling it with furniture Adam built and curtains Fiona sewed and the sound of children's laughter. Samuel was joined by a daughter, Catherine, 2 years later, and then another son, James, 2 years after that. Each child was wanted, loved, celebrated. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the Irwin brothers. They expanded their holdings, improved their breeding stock, weathered droughts and harsh winters and the occasional cattle disease. Adam proved to have a gift for the business side of ranching, while Andrew preferred the day-to-day work of managing the land and livestock. Together, they built something lasting. Fiona found her place as well. Her sewing business grew, and she became known throughout the territory for her skill. But she also discovered a talent for teaching, and she began holding classes for the other ranch women, teaching them not just sewing but also how to read and write for those who had never learned. She started a small lending library in their front room, collecting books from traveling salesmen and mail-order catalogs. Education was important to her, the way it had been important to her father, and she wanted to pass that value on to others. She and Adam continued to grow together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had disagreements, of course, moments of frustration and anger that come with any long marriage. But they had learned how to fight fair, how to listen to each other, how to apologize and forgive and move forward together. On their 10th anniversary, Adam took her on a trip back to California. They left the children with Sarah and Andrew and traveled the route they had taken as newlyweds, but this time in comfort rather than hardship. They stopped in Willits, walking the streets Fiona had known so well. The town had changed. Many of the people she had known were gone, moved on, or passed away. The Golden Pine Saloon was under new management, quieter and more respectable. Mr. and Mrs. Chen still ran the general store, and they greeted Fiona with genuine warmth and curiosity about her life in Wyoming. "We always knew you would do well," Mrs. Chen said. "You were too strong to stay here." They visited her father's grave in the small cemetery on the edge of town. Fiona stood there for a long time, Adam's hand warm in hers, and told her father silently about her life, about the family she had built, about the joy she had found. She felt his presence there, felt his approval, and when they walked away, she left with a sense of peace. That night, lying in a hotel room that was far nicer than anything Willits had possessed when she lived there, Adam pulled her close. "Any regrets?" he asked. "None," Fiona said firmly. "You gave me a chance to be who I really am, to build a life that fits me. How could I ever regret that?" "I was terrified, you know," Adam admitted. "That night I proposed, I thought you would laugh at me, tell me I was crazy." "I thought I was crazy for saying yes," Fiona replied with a smile. "Marrying a man I had known for 2 weeks, leaving everything familiar, it should have been a disaster. But it was not. No, it was the best decision I ever made." They returned to Wyoming renewed, ready to continue building their life together. The children grew. Samuel into a serious young man interested in law and governance. Catherine into a spirited girl who loved horses and the outdoors. James into a sweet-natured boy who wanted to be a doctor like the man he was named after. When Samuel was 16, he asked his parents about how they had met, really met. Fiona and Adam looked at each other, and then they told the story honestly, holding nothing back. They told about the bet, about the cruelty of it, about the impulsive decision to marry on a frozen December night. Samuel listened quietly, and when they finished, he said, "So you married to escape, not because you were in love." "We married because we saw in each other the possibility of love," Adam corrected, "and the certainty of respect. Love came after, but it came because we made space for it, because we chose each other every day." "That is what marriage is," Fiona added. "It is not about the feelings you start with. It is about the choice you make every morning to stay, to grow, to build something together. Your father and I started with very little, but we built something strong." Catherine, who was listening from the doorway, came in and sat beside her mother. "Did you ever see any of those people again? The ones who bet on you?" "No," Fiona said, "and I do not need to. They do not matter to my life anymore. They never really did." "You matter to a lot of people, though," Catherine said. "All the women you teach, all the people who come to use your library, you matter to us. I think you always mattered, but in Willits, people were too small-minded to see it." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes at her daughter's words. This fierce, confident girl, who had never known what it was like to be diminished or made to feel less than, who took her worth as a given because she had always been shown that she had value. That was the greatest gift Fiona and Adam had given their children, that unshakable sense of their own worth. The years continued to pass. marked by seasons and harvests, by births and deaths, and all the ordinary miracles of life. Adam's younger brothers married and started families of their own, and the ranch became a sprawling compound of houses and people connected by blood and love. Sarah and Andrew had children and then grandchildren, and the younger generation played together in the same fields their parents had worked. Fiona's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Adam's moved from dark to distinguished gray. They grew older together, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but their spirits still strong. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Samuel went to law school in the East and returned with a degree and a wife, a smart young woman from Boston who fell in love with Wyoming's wild beauty. He set up practice in Sheridan, becoming known as a fierce advocate for fairness and justice. Catherine married a neighboring rancher and proved to be as skilled at managing land and livestock as any man. James went to medical school and came back to serve the territory, riding circuit to remote ranches and homesteads, bringing healing where it was needed. On their 25th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the main ranch house for a celebration. There were dozens of people there now, children and grandchildren and in-laws, all of them connected to that original decision made on a frozen December night in Willits. Andrew raised his glass in a toast. To Adam and Fiona, who showed us all what it means to take a chance on love, on each other, on building something that matters. You have made us all better people. They drank, and then there was food and music and dancing. Fiona watched her family, all the lives that had come into being because she had been brave enough to say yes to a man she barely knew, because Adam had been brave enough to ask. The ripple effects of their choice extended far beyond themselves, touching dozens of lives, shaping futures. Late in the evening, when the children were asleep and the adults were winding down, Adam took Fiona's hand and led her outside. The sky was clear and cold, brilliant with stars that seemed close enough to touch. They stood together in the quiet, breathing in the familiar sense of home. "I was thinking about that night," Adam said softly. "The night we married. Do you remember how scared we both were?" "I remember," Fiona said. "I remember thinking I was making a terrible mistake, that I would regret it forever. And now—" She turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything by asking for nothing except the chance to love her. His face was weathered now, lined with age and experience, but his gray eyes were the same, still seeing her clearly, still valuing what he saw. "Now I know it was the best mistake I ever made," she said, and then she laughed. "Except it was not really a mistake, was it? It was the first truly right choice I had ever made, choosing you, choosing us, choosing to believe that something better was possible." Adam pulled her close, and they stood together under the stars, two people who had found each other in unlikely circumstances and built a life that defied everyone's expectations, including their own. Years later, when they were both in their 70s and the ranch was being run by the next generation, someone in town mentioned the old story of how they had met. A young woman, facing her own struggles with expectation and independence, sought Fiona out to ask if the story was true. "Did you really marry a stranger just to prove a point?" she asked. Fiona, her hair white now but her eyes still sharp, smiled. "I married a man I was beginning to know because he offered me something no one else ever had. He offered me respect, partnership, the chance to be fully myself. That was not proving a point, that was claiming my life. But you barely knew him. I knew enough. I knew he saw me as a person, not a prize or a problem. I knew he wanted to build something with me, not make me into something for him. That was more than most marriages start with." She paused, then added, But I will tell you the real secret. Love is not something you find. It is something you build day by day, choice by choice. Adam and I built our love, and it has lasted because we kept choosing it, kept choosing each other, even when it was hard. The young woman left looking thoughtful, and Fiona hoped she had given her something useful, some piece of wisdom earned through decades of living. Adam died in his sleep at 78, peacefully and without pain. Fiona mourned him deeply, the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But she did not break. She had the strength he had always seen in her, the resilience that had allowed her to leave everything she knew and build something new. She lived another 5 years after his death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued teaching, continued running her library, continued being a source of wisdom and strength for the community she had helped build. On her last night, surrounded by family, Samuel asked her if she had any regrets about the life she had lived. Fiona looked around at all the faces she loved, at the people who existed because she had said yes to a cowboy on a frozen December night in 1883. She thought about the girl she had been, angry and trapped in a town that could not see her value. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and free and deeply loved. She thought about Adam, waiting for her somewhere beyond this life, and she smiled. "No regrets," she said clearly. "I lived exactly the life I was meant to live. I loved who I was meant to love. I built something that will last long after I am gone. How could I regret any of that?" She died that night, peacefully and without fear, and they buried her beside Adam on the ranch they had built together. Her gravestone was simple: Fiona Turner Irwin, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher, friend. But the words did not capture the fullness of who she had been, what she had meant to so many people. The town of Willits, California, where it had all started, eventually heard about her passing. The story of the bet, and the marriage and the life that followed became something of a legend in the area. Young women facing their own battles for independence would hear the tale and take courage from it. Young men would hear it and think about what kind of partners they wanted to be, what kind of love they wanted to build. The ranch in Wyoming continued to thrive for generations, run by Fiona and Adam's descendants who carried forward the values their great-grandparents had instilled. Respect for all people regardless of gender. The importance of education and growth. The belief that love was a choice made new each day, not a feeling that came and went. And sometimes, on cold December nights when the stars were bright and the air was sharp with winter, people on the ranch would tell the story of how it all began. They would talk about a bitter young woman in a cruel town and a cowboy with a broken body and an open heart. They would talk about a bet that was meant to humiliate and a marriage that was meant to defy. They would talk about how the town bet no cowboy would marry her by spring, but Adam Irwin married her that frozen December night, and how from that one brave choice came a legacy of love and strength that lasted for generations. It was a story about taking chances and choosing hope over fear. It was a story about seeing people for who they truly are and valuing what you see. It was a story about building love deliberately, carefully, with intention and commitment. Most of all, it was a story about how one choice, made in defiance and desperation and emerging hope, could change everything. Samuel Irwin eventually wrote down the full story at the urging of his own children. He interviewed everyone who had been there, gathered letters and documents, and created a detailed account of his parents' courtship and marriage, and the life they built together. The document became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through the generations, a reminder of where they came from and the values they were meant to uphold. In the introduction, Samuel wrote, "My parents were not perfect people. They made mistakes, had doubts, struggled with the same challenges all couples face. But they faced those challenges together, with honesty and respect and deep commitment to each other and to the life they were building. They showed us all that love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. Love is about showing up day after day and choosing each other. That is their legacy, and it is the greatest gift they could have given us. The ranch itself became known throughout Wyoming and beyond for the quality of its cattle and horses, but also for the way it treated its workers and neighbors. The Irwin family had a reputation for fairness and generosity, for standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Those values could be traced directly back to Fiona and Adam, to the lessons they learned and the choices they made. Catherine Irwin, who inherited much of her mother's fierce independence and her father's steady strength, became an advocate for women's suffrage in Wyoming. She traveled throughout the state speaking about the importance of women's voices in civic life, and she always credited her mother as her inspiration. "My mother showed me that being a woman did not mean being less," Catherine would say in her speeches. "She showed me that women could be strong and capable and independent while also being loving partners and devoted mothers. She never accepted the limits others tried to place on her, and she taught me to do the same. That is the world she fought for, and that is the world we must build together." James Irwin brought his medical skills to remote areas of Wyoming and Montana, often working with Native American communities who had limited access to health care. He was known for his compassion and his willingness to learn from traditional healing practices, integrating them with modern medicine. He often said that his mother had taught him to see the value in all people and all knowledge, to never assume that his way was the only right way. The house that Adam built for Fiona still stood a century later, carefully preserved by the family. It became a kind of shrine to their memory, a place where descendants would come to connect with their roots. The room still held furniture Adam had made, quilts Fiona had sewn, books from her original lending library. Standing in that house, you could almost feel their presence, the love that had filled those spaces. In the modern era, when the story of Fiona and Adam was discovered by a historian researching women in the Old West, it captured public imagination. Here was a love story that defied expectations, that showed a woman choosing her own path in a time when women had few choices. Here was a marriage that started as a practical arrangement, but became something profound and lasting. Here was proof that love built on respect and partnership could overcome any obstacle. The town of Willits, California, eventually erected a small plaque at the site where the old church had stood, commemorating the marriage that took place there on that frozen December night in 1883. Tourists would sometimes visit, drawn by the romantic notion of two people who barely knew each other taking such a dramatic chance on love. But those who knew the full story understood it was not really about romance in the conventional sense. It was about courage. It was about seeing possibility where others saw only impossibility. It was about two wounded, wary people extending trust to each other and discovering that trust could be the foundation of something beautiful. The legacy of Fiona and Adam Irwin extended far beyond their immediate family. The values they lived by, the example they set, influenced countless lives. People who had learned to read in Fiona's classes went on to educate their own children, breaking cycles of illiteracy. Women who saw Fiona living her life with independence and dignity found courage to demand the same for themselves. Men who witnessed the respectful partnership between Adam and Fiona learned to see their own wives and daughters differently. And always at the heart of it all was that one frozen December night in 1883, when a bitter young woman and an injured cowboy stood before a preacher and made promises to each other. Neither of them could have known then what those promises would grow into. How many lives would be touched and changed because they were brave enough to say yes to each other, to possibility, to hope. The story of their love was not one of thunderbolts and passion at first sight. It was quieter than that, deeper. It was the story of two people who chose each other deliberately and then kept choosing each other through decades of ordinary days and extraordinary challenges. It was the story of love as a verb, not a noun, something you do rather than something you feel. In the end, what made their story remarkable was not the dramatic circumstances of their meeting and marriage. What made it remarkable was what came after, the way they built a life together that honored them both, the way they created space for each other to grow and change, the way their love deepened with time rather than fading. They had proven the townspeople of Willits wrong in the most fundamental way. The bet had been that no cowboy would marry Fiona Turner by spring, the assumption being that she was unmarriageable, too difficult, too independent. But Adam Irwin had married her in December, and he had stayed married to her for more than 50 years, not out of obligation or stubbornness, but because she was exactly who he wanted to spend his life with. Their story became a testament to the power of seeing people clearly and valuing what you see. Adam had looked at Fiona and seen strength, intelligence, courage. Fiona had looked at Adam and seen respect, partnership, possibility. Neither had tried to change the other into something different. They had simply made space for each other to be fully themselves, and in that space, love had flourished. The town bet no cowboy would marry her by spring. But Adam Irwin married her that frozen December night, and from that single brave choice came a love story that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that lasted for generations. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth carrying forward as a reminder of what becomes possible when we choose courage over fear, hope over cynicism, love over loneliness. And somewhere in the mountains of Wyoming, on a ranch that had been built on hope and hard work, the spirits of Fiona and Adam Irwin rested easy, knowing that what they had started together continued on, that their love had become part of something larger than themselves, eternal as the mountains, enduring as the land itself.